What would cause a man to miss the burial of his best friend for life? Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy were more than just funny people, they were icons who changed the way people think about comedy. But behind the laughs were years of stress, heartache, and quiet that the public never witnessed. Fans have been wondering for years why Stan never said goodbye to Hardy, but the answer is far sadder than anyone thought. The most famous pair in comedy. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy were quite different people, yet when they worked together, they formed a synergy that revolutionized comedy forever. One was tall and thin, and his face always looked like he was confused. The other was round and proud, and he walked like a man who thought he had everything under control until the world said differently. They worked together to make a funny rhythm that would last for generations. They were the most famous couple in Hollywood's golden era of laughing because of their timing, chemistry, and how easy it was for them to get into trouble. But behind the lights, scripts, and immaculate comedy routines, their personal lives were full of problems that didn't always get it to the public. In 1921, they met for the first time, but no one could have known how important that meeting would be. The movie was named The Lucky Dog. It was a short, silent comedy that didn't do very well. Stan portrayed a poor guy who was robbed by a thief, and Oliver played the thief. They didn't share many scenes, and none of them could have guessed that they would be part of anything significant. At the time, both were just trying to get by in the crazy early days of Hollywood, when actors moved from one short film to another in search of a payday and maybe some fame. Stan Laurel grew up with the scent of sawdust and grease paint all about him. His parents owned a theater, and from the beginning, he was fascinated to the lights on stage. He joined Fred Carnot's vaudeville troupe, which was the same group that made Charlie Chaplin famous. Worked as Chaplin's understudy, attentively examining how Chaplin used subtle movements and stillness to create whole worlds. It was a master class in telling stories with your body. And Stan didn't know it at the time, but those lessons would be the basis for everything he made subsequently. Stan stayed behind when the troupe went on tour in the US to look for fresh film prospects. He went back and forth between minor acting jobs and directing jobs, never really knowing who he was supposed to be. But he learned how to frame a shot, how to use rhythm, and how a single pause or gaze might bring a scene to life. These were the things that would later show how smart he was. Oliver Hardy's environment was very different, but somehow it got him to the same place. Hardy began his career singing in theaters, then moved on to vaudeville and eventually silent movies. People called him Babe, which was a term that stayed after a barber called him that when he was younger. He was larger than life in both his presence and his personality. By the early 1920s, he had already been in hundreds of movies. He wasn't a star, but he was a reliable supporting actor who could make even a little part stand out. Putting Pants on Philip, which came out in 1927, was the first time the Hal Roach Studios officially paired Laurel and Hardy. Something connected right away. It wasn't made up or pushed. It was normal. Laurel's delicate, childlike amazement was a wonderful match for Hardy's big sense of self-importance. Laurel would blink, bend his head, and gaze pathetically at the camera. Hardy, on the other hand, would roll his eyes, blow up his chest, and try to keep his dignity in the thick of the tragedy. Their chemistry didn't merely work. It turned into its own language. They constructed a kingdom of laughing over the following 20 years. They worked together on more than 107 movies, and each one was a masterclass in physical humor. They didn't use a lot of talking or rapid jokes. They made people laugh by using timing, rhythm, and emotion instead. The Cuckoo Song, their theme song, is one of the most famous movie songs of all time. A few notes may get people's attention and let them know that chaos and charm were about to happen. Critics loved how well the fool and the irritated gentleman balanced each other out, two extremes that worked perfectly together in a funny way. They were famous all throughout the world, not just in the US. They went on tour in Europe, where people loved them like folk heroes. In 2005, British comedians voted them the 8th best comedy act of all time, which shows that their jokes had never really become old. But even legends can't escape the passage of time. The world that had formerly adored slapstick was shifting by the end of the 1940s. People wanted new and modern types of entertainment after the war. The magic that used to fill cinemas began to dissipate. And when Laurel and Hardy made their last movie, Heartache, in 1951, the fissures were too big to miss. From start to finish, the production was a nightmare. Both males were not in good health. The script wasn't very good, and the French and Italian crews didn't get along, which made things worse. The movie didn't live up to their legend, though. And for the first time, it didn't seem easy to laugh anymore. It was the end of an era, not because they had lost their spark, but because the world around them had changed. But even when the cameras stopped filming, their relationship would last through good times, bad times, and tragedy. For Stan Laurel, it would lead to one last silent choice. That would have fans wondering for a long time. Stan's own problems. Stan Laurel could make people laugh, but his personal life was frequently a storm he couldn't manage. When the cameras weren't on, he was a man who worked too much, had problematic relationships, and was always looking for ways to make things ideal. His problems generally started in his heart. Stan's love life was full of bright beginnings that swiftly developed into public problems. He was married 5 times, although only to 4 ladies. One of them he married twice. The pattern was like a movie: love, misunderstanding, and then everything fell apart, just like in one of his own comedies. Before Hollywood knew him as half of Laurel and Hardy, Stan's first big relationship was with May Dahlberg, an actress and performer from Australia. They met while working in vaudeville, and for a period she was his partner on and off stage. May was brave, unpredictable, and often resentful of Stan's rising prominence. She said she thought of the name Stan Laurel and got him to change it from his birth name, Arthur Jefferson, because it sounded better for show business. The name remained, but the stress did too. Stan's career quickly ran into trouble because of May's presence. She would often stop rehearsals, challenge directors, and make things awkward on set to get involved in his work life. The people who worked at Hal Roach Studios thought she was a liability, and Stan's chances of getting work started to go down. Producer Joe Rock made an amazing offer in 1925 since things had become so bad. He is said to have agreed to pay May a compensation, possibly as much as $10,000, if she would leave Stan and never come back to the U.S. She said yes, and for the first time in years, Stan could breathe. But that kind of solution doesn't get rid of the emotional damage it causes. His later marriages didn't help either. In 1926, Stan married actress Lois Nielsen, and for a while, everything appeared solid. They had 2 kids, but they broke up because of their celebrity and long hours at work. After his divorce, Stan married Virginia Ruth Rogers, but they got divorced. Then he married Vera Shuvalova, a Russian opera singer, but he went back to Ruth. It was a carousel of love, regret, and trying to make things right. He wasn't mean or cold. He was just restless and couldn't find the peace he was looking for. Stan's real marriage seemed to be with his profession, even when he was alone. Oliver Hardy liked to take it easy when creating movies, allowing filmmakers and scripts to do their jobs. Stan, on the other hand, couldn't let go of control. He was the creative force behind the two of them, although most of the time he wasn't given credit as a writer or director. But everyone at Hal Roach Studios knew who was making the movies. He wrote jokes, cut scenes, rewrote scripts, and always thought of new ways to make things a little funnier, a little sharper, and a little better. People said he spent hours in the editing studio changing the timing by fractions of a second, sure that one wrong pause could ruin a whole joke. People remembered how he would practice over and over again and then throw away a complete scene if it didn't feel right. For Stan, comedy wasn't about serendipity or instinct, it was about building things. Every fall, gaze, and pause was well planned. That need for perfection was part of what helped Laurel and Hardy last forever, but it came at a cost. He felt a lot of pressure from the duty. Hardy could leave the studio and relax at a party or on the golf course, but Stan had to bring the work home. He was always drawing ideas, reworking lines, or calling editors late at night to fix something that had been troubling him. The need to stay famous only grew stronger when the two of them were at their most famous. People expected Stan to be great every time, and he took that personally. His health started to suffer from the stress over time. He got diabetes, and by the 1940s, heart problems were making it hard for him to move around. He worked long hours and was under a lot of stress, but he wouldn't back down. His job was now a big part of who he was. He kept making sketches and ideas for movies that never happened, even when he was too weak to act. Being famous at first helped him, but it later became a burden. Hollywood was changing, and the style of comedy that had made him famous was no longer the main thing. Younger people thought the plotting, methodical humor of the Laurel and Hardy era was old-fashioned because of sound pictures, new styles, and faster pacing. Stan felt it strongly, heartbroken that everything he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. Every time I failed, it felt like it was my fault. Every time I succeeded, it felt like it was just for a short time. He put all of his heart into laughing, but when the laughter stopped, he was left with a silence that few could understand. And that stillness, pressure, and suffering would soon lead to some of the most talked about moments in the history of comedy. The problems that the two of them had. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy become the world's most famous couple of idiots. But reality outside of the camera was much more complicated than the neat mayhem they made on camera. There were gossip, terrible choices, and emotional fissures that even their closest friends tried to ignore under the charm and humor. Stan Laurel was always the more serious of the two, especially when it came to his work. But such intensity sometimes affected his personal life, where rumors often made it hard to tell the truth from an exaggeration. Over time, people started to talk about how much he drank. Some co-workers stated he was having a hard time with sadness, especially when work slowed down or romances broke up. The man who was famed for making beautiful moments on film suddenly couldn't fix the chaos of his personal life. People said he was pulling away from pals, drinking to calm the nerves that came with both success and failure. His health was already weak, and the stress of having to change all the time just made it worse. Reports from inside said that a man was caught between being proud of his history and being afraid of being irrelevant. People said he was hard to work with even when he was at his best. Some people at Hal Roach Studios thought he was too controlling and didn't trust anybody else's judgment. He wanted to be in charge of everything, from the writing to the props, lighting, and even the costumes. Stan thought of comedy as a type of precise art, but not everyone agreed. There were rumors that his perfectionism made crew workers leave and sometimes tried Hardy's patience. Some others thought it was dictatorship in the name of dedication. Oliver Hardy's life was not without its problems. And even though he masked them well behind his friendly smile, they often made the news. He got married 3 times, and each time it appeared like the marriage ended in heartbreak. People reported that Myrtle Reeves, his second wife, had trouble with drinking, and their relationship got worse and worse. Friends said that they had fights that left both of them tired. Hardy was gentle and ready to forgive, yet he often got stuck in cycles of anger and guilt. There was a big difference between how calm he was on screen and how chaotic things were at home. He also has money problems. He was too kind, always helping friends and spending money on things he didn't need. But he had trouble with taxes over and over again because he didn't pay attention to money. The 1930s and 40s weren't good for actors who didn't know how to run a business, and Hardy trusted individuals who didn't always have his best interests at heart. He owed the government a lot of money at times, and there were occasions when he had to take on less important or lesser jobs to make ends meet. He didn't grumble about it much, but it wore him down. Even if they had problems, the public still saw them as the same 2 wonderful men they played on TV. The innocence of their personas had become who they were. To millions of admirers, they were more than just actors, they were icons of friendship and happiness. That picture was so powerful that few people could see 2 old comedians dealing with health difficulties, creative blocks, and the steady loss of stardom. People didn't want to accept it when tales started to spread about them being at odds. They had such strong chemistry that the concept of a fight seemed inconceivable. But their partnership was never always peaceful. They didn't agree on the direction, the scripts, or who should make the final decision. Stan's intense personality sometimes contrasted with Hardy's laid-back one. There were times when they hardly talked to each other between scenes, only talking to the cameras, where being professional required it. But the love that was there under the stress never went away altogether. People were interested in more than just their friendship. Some people thought that their connection might have meant anything more throughout the years. For decades, they had traveled, worked, and depended on each other more than anybody else. On tour, they often shared hotel rooms, finished each other's sentences, and seemed like they couldn't be apart. It looked to the audience like a partnership that was more than just friendship. There were rumors that there was a love element, but there was never any concrete proof of this. Most people who knew them thought they were brothers, that they had created an emotional bond through years of fighting together. The rumors didn't go away, though, maybe because their chemistry on screen was so real that people couldn't believe it was just business. As they became older, it got harder to keep the borders between their public and private lives straight. They were both having troubles of their own. Stan was sick and restless, and Hardy was sick too, as well as tired of dealing with money and emotions. But they acted like everything was fine while they were together. They smiled for pictures, were polite in interviews, and tried to keep up the appearance that Laurel and Hardy were still the same as people knew them. And as the world moved on, Hardy's problems would get worse, and no amount of humor could hide the toll they took. Hardy's sad fall. It seemed too unfair for a man who had spent his whole life making people laugh to have to go through Oliver Hardy's decline. The world knew him as a round, self-assured man with a bowler hat and a glimmer of self-importance. Slowly, this image faded, and he became a weaker version of himself that few people recognized. Years of physical stress, bad habits, and the stress of always performing began to take their toll on him, and it was terrible to see him change. Hardy's weight has always been a part of who he was on television. Their comedy was mostly about how different sizes they were. The big, arrogant man was trying to keep everything in order while his smaller, clumsy colleague messed everything up. But that weight remained a burden for the rest of his life. His size was worrisome by the 1940s. Reports said he weighed more over 300 pounds, and the physical strains of performing, touring, and filmmaking were starting to take their toll on him. What people thought was cute roundness was really a health issue waiting to happen. Hardy had a small heart attack in 1954. It didn't kill him right away, but it made him face the one thing he'd been ignoring for years, his health. The scare made him change a lot of things. He started a stringent diet on his doctor's advice since he wanted to be back in control. In the next few months, he lost more than 150 pounds. His friends hardly recognized him since he had changed so much. Fans were shocked when he showed up in public again. The spherical icon that had represented half of the world's favorite comedy combo was no longer there. His face had gotten thinner, his clothes hung loosely, and he looked like a ghost instead of the happy person he used to be. Some tabloids said he might be dying of cancer. Some people thought he might have had a strange ailment. Hardy never explicitly addressed the reports, but he was still polite and kind. There was a deep melancholy about him, as if he knew that the public no longer recognized the man they once loved, but simply a ghost of him. Sadly, his substantial weight loss didn't do anything to help him once the damage had already been done. Years of smoking a lot and eating badly had really hurt his heart and lungs. He had been a smoker for most of his life and would often smoke during breaks on movie sets or between shoots. It was part of the lifestyle of the time. Studios, dressing rooms, and even sets were full of cigarette smoke. But Hardy couldn't stop doing it. His body was already having trouble recovering from years of stress when physicians cautioned him about the effects. His heart problems, weak lungs, and weariness made it more and harder for him to move. The man who had once chased Laurel across roofs and downstairs on video now had trouble moving. Offers for movie roles dried up, in part because people wanted to remember him as he had been, not as he had become. He turned down public appearances and instead chose to live peacefully with his wife, Lucille. They took care of him with love until the end of his life. Another catastrophe happened in 1956. Hardy had a huge stroke that left him immobile and unable to talk. It was a tragic turn of events for someone whose life had been all about timing, performance, and expression. He was in bed, and Stan Laurel called and wrote to him a lot, but Hardy was too feeble to answer. Their link, which had gotten them through years of laughing in bad times, was now solely in quiet. Hardy's public existence came to an end with the stroke. He would never work again, never stand in front of a camera, and never share the screen with Laurel again, as he had done so many times before. In August 1957, he had 2 further strokes in a row. His body couldn't take any more trauma. Oliver Norville Hardy died of cerebral thrombosis on August 7, 1957, at the age of 65. People reacted right away when they heard about his demise. People from all around Hollywood, Europe, and beyond sent their condolences. Comedians, actors, and filmmakers who had grown up watching him talked on how well he timed things and how kind he was. He was called a gentle giant in the news, and his comedy stemmed from being human, not nasty. Fans who had been with Laurel and Hardy since the beginning felt like they had lost a buddy. Theaters all across the world showed replays of their movies, and people laughed and cried anew, recalling how happy he had made them. Hardy's death was more than just the death of a man. It was the end of an era. The golden age of slapstick was already over, but Hardy's death seemed to mark the end of that simpler time in comedy. Stan Laurel couldn't fill the silence that his disappearance left. Fans yearned to see the one man who had been in almost every shot of Hardy's life for weeks after he died. But on the day of the funeral, something happened that no one expected, and that stunned everyone. Why Stan isn't here? On a hot day in August 1957, Oliver Hardy's funeral was held at Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood. The ceremony was simple, quiet, and dignified, and there were many familiar faces. Family, friends, and former co-workers came together to say goodbye to the man who was half of one of the best partnerships in movie history. Photographers waited outside, hoping to get a picture of something that everyone thought would happen. Stan Laurel, standing next to his best friend for the last time. But he never showed up. The seat that had been saved for him was still unoccupied. And for a lot of people, that absence became as big a deal as the funeral itself. The facts hurt a lot more than it seemed to. Stan was not in good health when Hardy died. He was frail after years of diabetes, heart problems, and being tired all the time. He was enjoying a tranquil life in Santa Monica, writing letters, and getting over the emotional and physical toll his job had taken on him. When he heard about Hardy's death, it hurt him harder than anybody else knew. Later reports from people close to him said that he was really upset after hearing it. It wasn't just a loss for him, it felt like a part of who he was had been ripped away. It wasn't easy to choose to go to the funeral. Stan's doctor strongly warned against it, saying that the stress and physical effort could cause another collapse. He couldn't manage the travel or the stress. He knew he wouldn't be able to stand through the service even if he had ignored the warning. When questioned why he made the choice, he just answered, "Babe would understand." Stan had called Hardy Babe for decades. He called him thus, even in private correspondence. That one brief sentence revealed all about how close they were as friends. Stan also knew how to act in public, especially when it came to famous people like them. He understood that if he seemed weak and upset, the press would focus on him instead of Hardy. The funeral would no longer be about the guy who died, it would be about the person who lived. He didn't want that. Hardy owned the day and anything that was in the way. Even one made out of love would have seemed terrible. It was easy to mistake his absence, though. At the time, newspapers thought that something had gone wrong between the two guys. Some others said they had a fight before Hardy got sick or that their partnership ended on bad terms. Some others thought that Stan might have been too proud or guilty to see his friend buried. Fans penned emails to periodicals, feeling lost and let down. It was hard to believe that one of them wouldn't be there to say farewell to the other for folks who had grown up watching the two of them fall and get back up together on TV. But the people who knew them best recognized the reality. Laurel made it plain in private talks and later interviews that there had been no fight and no lingering anger. Their friendship lasted till the end. Stan had actually talked to Lucille Hardy a lot in the last several months of Hardy's life, sending letters of comfort and asking for news. After the funeral, fans and co-workers from all around the world sent him letters of condolence, but he mostly kept quiet about how sad he was. When reporters asked him, he would only answer that he had lost his best buddy. He kept writing jokes, short plays, and ideas even when he was sick and had to stay home. Many of them still had Hardy's name next to his. It was as if he couldn't picture making anything without him. Every unfinished concept ended the same way. Hardy's character was waiting just off screen for the signal that would never come. Stan Laurel quietly left public life when Hardy died. Without his companion by his side, the stage, which had once been his second home, meant nothing to him. He never performed again, turning down every invitation that came his way. He thought of Laurel and Hardy as one thing, something that couldn't exist without both parts. Instead, he spent his last years surrounded by things that reminded him of their profession, such photos, letters, and scripts from movies that defined a time. He kept writing even after he retired. His desk was full of sketches and incomplete scripts, all of which had his usual touch of timing and simplicity. But he didn't want to do them. Writing became a quiet part of his day, a way to stay connected to the skill that had given him a sense of purpose. He also took the time to address fan correspondence, sometimes writing long, heartfelt letters to fans who had grown up laughing at his work. People who came to see him were sometimes shocked by how kind and humble he was. He was always willing to talk about Hardy and their time together. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences gave him an honorary award in 1961 for his work in film humor. He was quite affected by the honor, but he didn't go to the ceremony. He liked to keep out of the spotlight, much like he did for most of his later life. Stan Laurel died of a heart attack in 1965 at the age of 74. His impact lives on in comedy today. People remember him not only as a pioneer, but also as a faithful friend who never stopped laughing with the person he lost. What are your thoughts? Was there more to Stan's disappearance than met the eye? Please leave your answers in the comments section below. If you liked this video, don't forget to click on the next one on your screen and like it. Also, subscribe to our channel to get more updates.